Bienvenidos, aloha, welcome into Sunset Rewind. Alex Crawford, Howard Kroom with you here. Before we get into our CIF Southern Section quarterfinal games where 4 Sunset League teams were playing, take a second, log on to your social media platforms, give us a follow at Sunset_Rewind, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and of course, bookmark our website, sunsetrewind.com. We got stats, recaps, and we're improving those stats and analysis every single week for you. But Howard, tough break in the quarterfinals. We had 4 Sunset League teams playing, only one, Newport Harbor Sailors, moving on to the next round. The league champions, Los Alamitos Griffins, lost, as well as the 2 teams in Division II, Edison and Corona Del Mar. So even though we had 4 teams in the quarterfinals, a little bit bittersweet doing this recap here today.
Well, when you got teams playing in Division I, Division II, you know the quarterfinals is going to be a lot of talent. So no matter who you draw, no matter which one of those 2 divisions you're in, it's going to be hard to get a win. So good season for all these Sunset League teams. Unfortunately, 3 of the 4 dropped off this week, but still a good week, and we saw some stuff that we can feel good about as the Sunset League, Sunset League fans.
All right, let's start off with Division I, the quarterfinals. Number 7 seeded Los Alamitos Griffins taking on the number 2 seed, the number 2 team in the country, the St. John Bosco Braves at Panish Family Stadium in Bellflower. And Los Al, they lost 63-38. They actually scored the first touchdown of the game, but then that ground game of St. John Bosco got going. SJB rattles off 21 unanswered points, and it was kind of over from there. Howard, talk about the ground game, the rushing game of the St. John Bosco Braves a little bit. That was impressive.
Well, that's what we had as a key going into the game. On the preview, we talked about this is an upfront group for St. John Bosco that's as dominant as anybody in the country. We know they have multiple running backs, and they're 2 and 3 deep at the offensive line, and they get after you. And it showed. There was a running back for St. John Bosco that averaged 25 yards every time he touched the ball. 3 running backs had over 100 yards. There was 8 rushing touchdowns. These are numbers that you just don't see at any level of football, especially playing against a defense like Los Al, who we know is very talented. We know there are kids on that defensive line that are going to play Division I football. That just tells you the talent that St. John Bosco has, the size, the athleticism, the strength that they bring on the offensive line. And when you can get that kind of ground attack going, it makes it impossible for your opponent to stop you.
Looking at silver linings for Los Al in this game, the offense was clicking. They put up 38 points on a tough St. John Bosco defense. Second most points scored against Bosco all season. The most coming from the number 1 team in the country, the modern-day Monarchs, who put up 42 on Bosco. So credit to Malachi Nelson, Makai Lemon, and those guys for getting it done against a really, really tough defense.
Well, that's what jumped out at me. It was the points scored by this Los Al offense. I mean, credit to guys like DeAndre Moore, got the scoring started early. Ethan O'Connor had a big game on defense with an interception, also put some points on the board with the touchdown in the third quarter. So Ethan O'Connor came up big. He's a guy we expect to see. But what I really, really loved, and shout out to the offensive line as well, they gave Malachi a lot of time. But what I really loved was the stat line from Malachi, the performance from Makai. These are guys that they've got a target on their back. You know, they're the 5-star guys. They're the 714 connection. They're all-world superstars, right? They're easy to hate on them and say, oh, it's just rankings and it's just, 24/7 ratings and stuff like that. But no, they had an opportunity to go up against a top 5 team in the country. Everybody on St. John Bosco is going to college. And if Makai and Malachi come out and have an average night, have a subpar night, and Los Al gets blown out, everybody's going to blame them. They're going to say, oh, look, these guys, they're not what we thought they were. Instead, Malachi throws for 5 touchdowns. Makai is taking guys deep, going over the top, scoring 70-something yard touchdowns, puts up 3 total scores for the night. I mean, these are numbers that are impressive against anybody, let alone a defense like St. John Bosco. So those are 2 guys that when they needed to show up in the toughest game of the year, they made you understand that they can play on any football field in the country. They're that serious.
I think Los Al's season was best summed up when we talked to Griffins defensive coordinator Michael Cobley a couple weeks ago when he said people got this all wrong about the Griffins being in Division I. Some people were saying, well, I really wish we could have seen the Griffins in D2, see what they could do. It's not fair for such a historic team and a great season to have to go up against these Trinity League schools that are just on another level. And he said, this is an honor. Even if we only go to the quarterfinals, this is an honor. We're taking on not just the number 2 seed in the Southern section, the number 2 team in the country. So I like the way Coach Cobley summed it up. And yeah, it's tough that Los Al lost, but still a great season for the Griffins. And those guys you just talked about, Malachi Nelson, Mekhi Lemon, they're coming back next year. So look out. We expect to see the Griffins here again. Moving down to Division II, the Edison Chargers were on the road against Inglewood. The Chargers, the 4 seed, Inglewood, the 12 seed, and Edison lost 22-16. Now, 16 points from Edison every week since the preseason, Howard. We've talked about the high-powered Chargers offense, the potency of this offense, the weapons, but Inglewood was able to shut them down. What caused Inglewood to be so successful defensively in this game?
Well, it's the quarterfinals. First and foremost, that's what I said to start off this show. You know, every team you play, whether it's Inglewood as a 12 seed or the Chargers as a 4 seed, it doesn't matter. There's going to be a lot of talent. So you take Inglewood, first and foremost, they got after it up front. They're a big, strong, athletic group on the defensive line, and they got to Tyler Gioia. He was under pressure, sacked 5 times in the first half, and when you're sacked 5 times, you know you're running around. You just can't get your footing. So that stifles what you want to do in the pass game because you don't have time. But then in coverage, Inglewood was also athletic, and they were all over the Edison receivers. So you combine a stout front, athletic coverage, and you make it tough on the offense, plus a couple of turnovers for the Edison Chargers, and you just can't make those kind of mistakes when you're playing a tough defense like Inglewood.
Yeah, these were two good teams, very good teams slugging it out. And despite the loss, Edison, they were up 16-8 in the fourth quarter, had chances. Inglewood scored back-to-back touchdowns in the fourth, then had a fourth down stop on 4th and goal against the Chargers, and that ended up sealing the deal. But the Chargers, they took that lead on a Troy Fletcher touchdown, and like we've said almost every week this season, Troy Fletcher, he was popping off. He balled out for Edison on Friday night.
Well, you look at Troy Fletcher's numbers. I mean, 30 carries, almost 200 yards. In the day of air raid and spread offenses, especially an offense like Edison with 5 or 6 different receivers that we like, you don't see a guy getting 30 carries. But that's how Troy Fletcher is. We talked about his senior year being a showcase of production. He does it in every way possible. Pick 6 in the first round of the playoffs, 30 carries in the second round of the playoffs. Anything his coaches ask him to do, he does. That's why Coach Grady said he's a pleasure to have on the football team, and he's a pleasure to watch. So even though Edison didn't have the game they wanted, obviously they couldn't get anything going in terms of offense, how they usually do with all the touchdowns, still, Troy Fletcher found a way to contribute and make his mark be felt on the game.
Sticking in Division II, the number 11 seed Corona Del Mar Sea Kings, they lost to the number 3 seed, the Orange Lutheran Lancers, at Davidson Field on Friday night, 38-14, the final score there. And Howard, we knew Corona Del Mar going up against a Trinity League opponent, it was going to be tough. The talent disparity was going to be noticeable. That's what it ended up being, and Coach Dan O'Shea talked about looking across the sideline at Davidson Field and noting that on Friday night.
And this was, I think, the second time in the last 11 years we've been at Corona Del Mar where we're like, after the first series, we're like, holy sugar. And Brian Pierce, our defense coordinator, mentioned it last night. He goes, Dan, I think it's 2020. I'm looking out there. I'm going, Brian, I think you're right. It's 2020. I mean,
well, they had the athletes, huh?
They have 20 guys that are faster than us until we get to our fastest guy. And it would take 20 guys. You know, our guy would be 21 who's strong enough in the weight room.
Right.
Yeah. And I'm like, holy sugar. And so the appreciation for their talent was clear.
Well, with Coach O'Shea, when he points out the size and the speed and kind of the physical talent disparity between Olu and CDM, he's not making any excuses. You know, Coach O'Shea's a guy that relishes these opportunities, and he loves to see his team compete against these Trinity League opponents. But the reality is that the Trinity League guys are just a different level. And when you're playing guys that are that big, that strong, that athletic, they make all of your execution difficult on offense and defense. For CDM, it's almost impossible to get the run game going. We've seen Corona Del Mar be a team that kind of feeds off of the big play throughout the year, these big, long, streaking touchdowns. They really couldn't get loose against Orange Lutheran.
We do need to give a shout-out offensively to wide receiver, the senior Harvard-bound Max Lane. He had the 2 touchdowns for Corona Del Mar, opened the game with a 45-yard touchdown catch from David Razor. Lane finished with 6 catches, 85 yards, and 2 TDs. So a bright spot there for the CDM offense.
Yeah, a couple other guys like usual, you know, Tipton had a good night. Hoke had a couple of catches. Evan Sanders usually has a big night. He got a little banged up, so didn't play in the second half. And Charlie Manning took some carries. We know he's a Swiss Army knife and does it all for the Sea Kings. So despite playing a tough group like Orange Lutheran, we know Corona Del Mar, they're always going to play hard. They're never going to make excuses. They're going to be well coached. They're going to take pride in what they do. And that's how they played on Friday night. Just had a tough opponent. I mean, one thing I liked was in the third quarter, we saw a long 18 or 19 play drive out of Corona Del Mar. That's just their perseverance, their guttiness. There was penalties on that drive, but they kept continuing to execute, continuing to fight, believing in themselves. And that's when we saw the second Max Lane touchdown. So there's always going to be some bright spots because they're a team that does play so hard and believes in what they do.
First postseason loss for CDM since 2018. They won state in 2019, and then the COVID season here in spring 2021, no postseason. So when you look at Corona Del Mar's season overall, they went 5-0 in non-Sunset League play. Then their two losses were to Los Al, Edison, and a Trinity League team. So overall, a pretty good body of work from Coach Dan O'Shea's squad. Moving on down to Division 6, Sunset Rewind becomes Sailor Rewind as they're the only Sunset League team left in the postseason. They had to make the long trip up Highway 101, up PCH to Santa Barbara, and they beat the Santa Barbara High School Dons 49-14 to punch their ticket to play another team nicknamed the Dons, the Dominguez Dons. They'll play them Friday night in Davidson. But Howard, let's talk about this game. The Sailors, they were tied up 14-14 early second quarter. Looked like it might be a dogfight, a bit of a shootout. Newport would go on to score the next 5 touchdowns and win 49-14. And the credit has to go to Coach Arredondo and that defense. Coach Lofthouse said as much when we talked to him. He talked about the defense coming together. It says the Sailors, for the first time this season, they finally put together 2 complete games.
On the defensive side, our leaders, Carson Diavola and Robbie Kroll and the linebacking core, guys like Jacob Carlone. And it's just been a giant team effort. It just feels like the momentum has fully swung the process in terms of our players learning how to win football games and playing 4 complete quarters. We've talked about that all year, playing 4 quarters. And in the last 2 games, I feel like we've played 8 complete quarters start to finish, and there really hasn't been any drop off.
I agree with Coach Lofthouse. We got to give credit to the defense. I mean, week after week, especially in the second half of the season, the defense has been what's kept the Sailors in every single game. They've been what's kept the Sailors alive. We've seen struggles on the offense, but that D, from Johnny Checks to Carson Diavola to the defensive line, Carlone, Kroll, the linebackers. I mean, it's a full group effort by that defense. We always see 11, 8, 9, 10, 11 Navy helmets pursuant to the football on a run play. I mean, it's just a tough group to go up against, and they've been getting better week after week. And specifically in the Santa Barbara game, this defensive line got after it, was disruptive, and changed the game plan of what Santa Barbara wanted to do. They wanted to run the ball at the Sailors, but the penetration from the D-line made it impossible. And when you get that kind of performance from your defense, they go into the locker room at halftime, actually before halftime, after a second quarter touchdown by Santa Barbara never saw the end zone again. First quarter, early in the second quarter, they got a couple of touchdowns. Coach Arredondo and the defense make a couple adjustments. They've seen what the offense looks like now, and they pitch a shutout the rest of the game. That is what has gotten the Sailors all the way to the semifinals. This defense deserves all the credit.
Sure. They do, and we're giving praise to the defense, but we can't not talk about a performance from a guy on both sides of the ball. He had a pick 6 on defense and then 4 offensive touchdowns. Josiah Lamarque, one of the most electric sophomores in the region. We saw him as a freshman before his real freshman year playing club football. Then we saw him in the COVID season, and now 5 touchdowns in a quarterfinals game to punch your ticket to the semis. I mean, what a night for Josiah Lamarque. Our reporter, Taryn Rodriguez, caught up with the sophomore after the game.
What can you say about your big night, and how big of a win is this for your team?
I'll say it's a massive win, and everything I did tonight is what we work for as a team. It's not an individual performance. It's what we work for all week. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. We're going at it every single day, trying to be the best team we can be.
It's not often that a guy has that dominant of a performance. 5 touchdowns, 4 on offense, plus a pick 6. I mean, that's just silly. And when I look at that stat line, it makes me think about way back in the summer, in the preseason, when we were picking the best receiving cores in the Sunset League. And we were both super high on the Sailors. And one of the reasons we were so high was we felt like the top 2 receivers for the Sailors were as good as anybody in the league. And that's because you've got Cashton Hingham, the reigning Sunset League wide receiver of the year, so you know he's a stud. And then you got this young guy that we know about in Josiah Lamarque. We know what he's capable of. And we haven't seen any crazy performances. We've seen some stuff from Josiah, but then you get to the quarterfinals and he looks like an absolute different level athlete, going over the top, outrunning guys. Like we said, pick 6, just as reliable as can be. This is why we say that the Sailors have one of the best receiving cores around, because they've got 2 guys that can beat you in every way. And when you got Josiah Lamarque being this dominant, the sky's the limit.
5 touchdowns is crazy. I mean, that's an all-time performance, and it's by a sophomore in the playoffs. So something that, of course, Josiah Lamarque will never forget. Sailor Nation will never forget. And we also need to mention A.J. Guitron-Moore, the quarterback, the senior who started the year as the 3rd stringer, had a nearly perfect game, only 1 or 2 incompletions, and he hasn't been sacked yet this postseason. So the Sailors, they're finally, better late than never, but they're finally firing on all cylinders.
Well, if we've got A.J. Guitron-Moore, who's never been sacked, we've got him throwing for 1 million touchdowns. Obviously, we've got to give love to the offensive line. That means they had a great night. But also, when you look at the running backs, they went over 100 yards when you combine what Hayden Farley did and what Henry Slater did. They went over 100 yards. So just a dominant performance by everybody on the offense, something they can feel great about. And they're going to need another performance like that, particularly up front as they prepare for a very, very talented and athletic Dominguez team in the semifinals.
Yep, Sailors don't need to make a super long road trip. They'll be at home against Dominguez Friday night at Davidson Field with a trip to the CIF Division VI Finals on the line. Well, Howard, unfortunately, only one Sunset League team left, the Newport Harbor Sailors, but continue to stay tapped into Sunset Rewind on social media at Sunset_Rewind or on SunsetRewind.com. We've got more coverage coming for you for all the players, parents, and coaches in the Sunset League. For my broadcast partner, Howard Kroom, this is Alex Crawford saying from the 405 to PCH, from Saddleback to the Pacific Ocean, you've been watching Sunset Rewind. Thanks for tuning in.